Morning, everyone. Let's look to the Lord. Our Father and our God, we thank you for this day that you have made. We ask right now, Father, that you would connect these great minds together, allow us to work on your behalf and work on behalf of our community. We thank you, Father, for the ability to be focused on our people as we focus on all people. We are interested in closing the wealth gap, Father. You have anointed these individuals to give us insight. Meet us now, lead us now. It's in Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, awesome. That's so much better. Get a little Jesus in your life, and all of a sudden, everything else starts to work out. But today we're excited. To our valued members, welcome back, and to our guests joining us for the first time today, we're so happy you decided to spend your morning with us. CEEM is a membership cooperative that is improving the economic and financial health and educational outcomes within the Black community. We are creating parity, an environment and an expectation that everyone has the same opportunity for success. To everyone in the audience today, please help us spread the word by becoming a CEEM member yourself, inviting those you think may too benefit from CEEM, or simply joining us for next month's webinar. We create this space as a space where we can create trust. We love the individuals that we get to host and here, because they provide our community information from a very researched perspective that can help us guide our next steps, both personally in our own lives, but also as a community, so we can help pulling each other on the same end of the rope to drive value for the proverbial us. Today, we have two amazing speakers, each with a unique answer to the question of how we close the racial wealth gap. Our planned third speaker, Mikal Quarles, was called into action this morning in his role at JP Morgan Chase and is no longer able to join us today. But I think he was called into a meeting with the CEO to talk about the action steps they are taking to close the racial wealth gap. Those are the kinds of people that we have on the call today, and those are the kinds of people we always have on the call. And so sometimes we have to just be in acceptance of the fact that he's doing the work on the ground. And sometimes that work on the ground means that you can't be on our webinar. But we are excited to have him on a future webinar where we can discuss these things and how institutional capital plays a role. But that's also indicative of the people that we have with us today. Dempster Cherry, he is personal wealth, right? The things that he's going to talk about and bring to the community today are really indicative of what we can all do as individuals. And then Ann Price, she wrote the book on almost all of the policy. And so if you look at a lot of the research on whether it's on reparations, whether it's on community organizing and closing the racial wealth gap, a lot of that research is housed in the Insight Center, which she operates. As a background, the racial wealth gap refers to the disparity in assets of typical households across race. So what that means for us as Black folks, we own in the median 1/10 of the wealth of the median white person. When we think about medians, that means if you have all of the Black people who live in the United States of America and you cut them in half and you just took that number, that's the median. So that person has 1/10 of the wealth of, if you put all the white people up on a line and you take the person in the middle, our person in the middle has 1/10 of the wealth of that person. And it's not just skewed above. That means the people who are around them, the 10% more or less, also have significantly more wealth than we do. And we don't have as many people at the top. Now, why does that matter? That's what we're going to get into today, and we're really excited. So first, we have Dempster Cherry, president of DRC Insurance Agency and chief investment officer of DRC Wealth Management. And second, and our keynote speaker today is Ann Price, president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. Each of our speakers will present for a few minutes, each of our speakers will speak for a few minutes. Please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you would like them to answer in our Q&A section. which will follow the speaker presentations. So again, our first speaker is Dempster Cherry, president of DRC Insurance Agency and chief investment officer of DRC Wealth Management. Dempster Cherry is the chief investment officer, and in his role, he specializes in working with families, individuals, and business owners. His expertise is in money management, insurance, and alternative investments, retirement planning, hedging contracted stock positions, and tax minimization strategies. In effect, he helps people who have some assets grow their assets. And that's really what we can do as individuals to close the racial wealth gap. And so with that, turn it over to Dempster Cherry.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite, TJ. Or I'm sorry, Kyle. I'm here this morning to participate and get myself involved more in the conversation that I think it's very timely, specifically in 2021, but it's also very necessary for our furtherment as a people in this country and our furtherment in the global economic realm. As Kyle had just kind of briefly touched on, the 10 times of the margin of wealth disparity between African Americans and others in our country is real. The easiest way to look at that, I'm a big fan of numbers, is if the average white American is making $171,000 a year or has a net worth of equal to $171,000, typically the median black household has a equatable income of about 17,000. So immediately you can see that disparity, and that can be closed, I believe, from different ways of achieving that and different ways of tackling that strata. But nonetheless, if we have an open mind and an open heart to try to look at some different alternatives as opposed to what we've probably been digesting dogma-wise for most of our lives, there are avenues to improve our finances individually and as a group. I'm a big fan of that. When I started both of my firms, I had spent a number of years in the financial world, and I learned real quickly that individuals with less money get less help, get less tools, get less attention. Those individuals who have more money obviously get more tools, more attention. That really disturbed me, because when I see individuals, and especially the moms and the pops in the world who are struggling to keep their families together, keep the roof over their heads and their food on the table, when they go to a financial advisor or to mostly any financial entity looking for assistance, they usually don't get the full brunt of tools that are available to them. So I started my firms specifically to address that by basically leveraging all of my talents and all my relationships and all of my skill set into helping that sector of our economy that needs the help most. The millionaires and the 100,000-aires, the guys who are making 300,000 a year, they don't really need a whole lot of help. They get all the help they want, and it comes to them in spades. It's the individuals who are making 30,000, 50,000, 70,000, and struggling to keep themselves afloat, and at the same time build a base for their family to grow with, and to have some sense of generational wealth at some point in the future. That's what I'm really involved in. That's what I'm helping a lot of people achieve, and that's what I'd like to help today in contributing to this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Dempster. We're so excited for your perspective, because you're right. There is a lot of help for those who have a lot of money. But the question here is, how do we get from 17,000 to a lot of money, or enough so that we can more broadly have access? And so thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And we're also excited to have Ann Price, president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. Ann E. Price is the first woman president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. She previously served as the director of the Closing the Racial Wealth Gap initiative at Insight, and has worked in the public sector on a wide range of issues, including child welfare, hunger, workforce development, community development, and higher education. Ann's work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, O Magazine, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and numerous other publications. Again, we're so excited because literally she writes the policy for how to deal with closing the racial wealth gap, and has been doing so for the great majority of her career. So Ann Price, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It's so great to be with everyone today. And I'm really honored that I was invited to talk about an issue that is so near and dear to my heart, one I've been focusing on for the last decade. And I'm going to talk just for a few minutes because I know it'd be great for us to all get into a dialogue with one another and have this be an interactive conversation. But I'm going to take the 30,000 foot kind of conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about a few things. One, I want to talk about first how we can't close the racial wealth gap unless we deal with its root causes and structural inequities, period. It can't be done without focusing on that. Secondly, I want to talk about the fact that we need to connect the dots of what's happening with wealth and wealth extraction that we're currently not talking about, that's siloed in other kinds of discussions. One of them is criminal legal debt, for example. And then just briefly, want to talk about the narratives that we have to shift if we're going to move the needle. We can't continue to have narratives that deem Black people as less worthy, as lazy, as not working hard enough, because those narratives actually shape investments. They shape life outcomes. So we've got to pay attention to that. And then I'm going to say a last thing about going beyond the financial, because we talk a lot about wealth, only the financial. And my work with people across the country really reveals something that we probably already know, that Black people don't just think about wealth in financial terms solely, right? They think about a sense of community, a sense of having, cultural arts available, things that are not typically thought as just purely your family's pocketbook. So let me just start real quickly, and I'm going to show only 4 charts in my discussion because it's going to give you a better sense of why I'm focused on structural change. Before I get to this chart, because it's going to come, I'm going to say a couple of things. One is we've got to understand that people have wealth today because their grandparents, their great-grandparents, their great-great-great-grandparents had wealth. That wealth is intergenerational, right? And it really comes from historical policies, and not just slavery. So I'm going to give you just 2 quick examples, right? One is the Homestead Act that took place in the 1800s. So this was a land giveaway by the government. Government gave over 270 million acres of land, the size of Texas and California, for the mere price of a filing fee to white Americans, and not even people that were from this country. Even immigrants came over and got that land. And Black people did not get that land. Now, what's the implication of that today? So today, about 46 million Americans are still benefiting from that policy. That's a quarter of our population. But none of that land went to Black people, right? So you think about the magnitude of these policies of exclusion. If you think about the GI Bill, this is the greatest booster of the middle class America has ever seen, right? Just alone, white veterans got in today's dollars, $190 billion in loans to get low interest mortgages, to go back to school. All of that really sparked what we're even seeing today. That was the beginning of why there was IBM and why there's Google, really. And then we know that Black veterans were shut out. It goes on. And you add up the price tag of billions of investments. So we got to understand people didn't just get wealth. The government paved the way for them to have this wealth. And that's why they have wealth today. So we just can't look at what's happening with my family, right? That's going to create, this booming wealth, right? Like what happened with my grandparents? What do I have that I'm going to leave to my protege, right? Because that's really how it's passed. We've got to pass it down, or it doesn't happen, right? So we've got to know that we are the only people that started off with basically zero capital. Because other people had land, we had zero capital. So understand that in the face of even why people are talking about reparations. So we can't ignore that, because that is what's given people wealth today. And that is what has enabled whites largely to have that advantage, to be, you know, I was had a staff member a few years ago talk about, you know, their parents being able to own a vineyard, and then they growing up in Santa Monica and going to private school, then going to Harvard and having that paid for outright. Like, that is how advantage happens through those generations. And what we are trying to get at is, how do we help Black people build intergenerational wealth? Period. Right? And there's a whole lot of other things that come with that. There's a whole lot of things that come with that wealth and what wealth bestows: freedom, choice, the ability to weather something like a COVID crisis. Right? That's what we want. We can't simply on our own close the racial wealth gap. It doesn't. So when I hear that, you know, and that's what we sometimes conflate that with, like, we must build intergenerational wealth, right? But when you think about average wealth, and Dempster talked about median, that's like the typical person, the average day person, right? The typical person, right? There's $164,000 difference in the average Black and white American. Let me say that again, $164,000 in the typical American. So when we go to an average, when we average that out, right, like instead of splitting people in half, then we see this enormous difference. There is an $881,000 difference. So at the median, it's 164. At the average, when you put in all those millionaires and billionaires, it's $881,000. So, and that's not changed since 1989. The wealth gap has not done anything but widen, right? So we know this is a very deep systemic issue that is going to take enormous set of policies to get us to those numbers, right? But in the meantime, while we're fighting for that, we have to find ways in which we can build wealth in our communities and pass that down to the next generation. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of things that really we have to focus on, right? Because no matter what we're talking, whether it's entrepreneurship or it's home ownership, which is our major focus when we say how we're going to do this, what we need people to have is the wealth underneath that, not those items as the wealth generator necessarily, right? Wealth begets wealth, right? The businesses that have wealth underneath tend to do better, right? You know, that are not kind of scrapping and borrowing from credit cards, right? The wealth underneath is the stabilizer. Homeowners who have enough for down payment, who have that wealth underneath, tend to do better because they can buy homes that will build equity. Because that's what we're talking about here, right? If that's the investment, you want to build equity. It's home ownership has a lot of value for a lot of things, but some homes don't build equity. That's not really a wealth builder, right? It's just a place where your wealth is being held. There's a distinction between it driving it and it's a place where you're just holding it, right? So all that to say, let's talk about education. I'm going to go through this chart, and I want to be conscious of time. I thought I'd be more conscious of time than I forgot when I started. But just a few things, and I'll close. So when we think about education, education was that seemingly equalizer. I was told that all my life, you know, get a college degree, go on to graduate school. Now, we have to understand there is value in education, absolutely no doubt. And we know you need a college education to weather a new labor market and labor structure. But the reality is that it is not an equalizer, right? And it's kind of counterintuitive. You look at this, right? Blacks who have graduated from college have less wealth than whites who dropped out of high school. It's counterintuitive in everything we would believe as Americans. But this is a Black reality. And as education increases, the gaps get wider between whites and blacks to the point where it's $500,000 at the highest levels of education. And why is that? Largely, it's the wealth underneath. It's the wealth underneath that person walking in to that med school, that their parents had. It's white married couples who both have college degrees who are really, really kind of moving ahead of everyone else in terms of wealth. Okay, next slide. I want to say something about, and I think I have something on debt, but I want to get into student debt because it is the issue that we have to think about. And let me see, I think that chart's here, but I'll get to it later. So just another quick thing, income. We think income is an equalizer, and sometimes we conflate income and wealth. But wealth is everything. And meaning it is our measure of true security. It is that thing you weather if you lose your job, get a divorce, or if you're like living your dream and want to start your business. You want to buy a home. That is what wealth is, right? It's a fence between, catastrophe and, being able to actually, weather a storm. But people who earn the same it doesn't equalize wealth. So if whites earn, $100,000, the black person earns $100,000, it doesn't translate the same. Wealth doesn't translate the same for black people as it does for whites. The mechanisms that they utilize do not work in the same way for us because of structural issues that make it either harder. I always say, we are running up a down escalator. It doesn't mean that we can't achieve. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are structural barriers that make it harder, and you can see it play out in the numbers, right? If you look at the middle, this quintile. If you think about a middle income family, look at the wealth difference, $183,000 for a white family versus $26,000, right? That's a middle income. That's a huge difference. It's a $158,000 difference in wealth for people who earn around the same amount of money. So we just have to get out of our mind, because we have been told this. I know I believed it until I started doing this work, that these things would take us there. Like Derek Hamilton, great economist, always talks about, we've never truly known a black middle class in terms of wealth. And I was just blown away by that statement. Income, yes. Wealth, no. And that is startling, right? That is absolutely startling. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so let me get into this education debt thing, because this is the issue that we must pay attention to. And it's not just about young people coming out of college, right? Because the reality is that we've been told black people don't value education, and that nothing could be further from the truth. We highly value education. We have gone to college in greater proportions. Black women are going to college at extremely high rates, going on to grad school. And we found this in our studies, that black families who have far less wealth than whites are much more willing to help them financially. And when black families can help their adult children in college, we don't even know the dollar amount because the data doesn't give us that specificity. We know outcomes are equalized. So I always say this is like a flip the script on our thinking. It's not education that equalizes wealth, it's wealth that equalizes education. When those parents help, completion rates are the same for blacks and whites. Home ownership rates are the same for blacks and whites, a little slightly higher for whites, but much higher than those parents who could not help their adult children. And graduate school completion is almost identical to whites, 25%. Amazing. So don't say we don't value education, but the debt, which is not an issue of personal responsibility, it's a structural issue, is something we have to pay attention to. Look at the levels of debt that people with masters and professional degrees hold compared to whites. We hold so much more debt, and we hold higher amounts of debt. We default higher rates, right? And why is that? it's not about personal responsibility. It's because there's not wealth underneath, right? This is borrowing. And I mean, I went to an HBCU, saw many students come in. They didn't have anything really. They're there by the skin of their teeth. And then they couldn't make it through 4 years because they didn't have the money, right? It is really that the lack of wealth. But this, and I want to say this because this is not just about millennials. This is about people in their 50s as well. We are seeing a high number of people with their 50s, not only with their own debt, but their children's debt. And what this could mean for us is that later on, those folks who are very close, some of them to retirement, can start to see their Social Security garnished. So these are all things we've got to be thinking about when we think about how we're going to build wealth and pass it down. I don't know, I think, is that my last slide or is there one more slide? Not sure. Is that it? Yeah, just my last slide, you know, is this basically the work, hard work, you know, doesn't necessarily pay off in the same way, right? However you cut it, we just have less wealth. And when we get to retirement, we, you know, we have a third of the wealth that white folks have. So anyway, I'm saying all this to say that we have to know that this is largely structural. Blacks go to outside efforts to build wealth, always have, always trying to do it on their own, create their own economic engines. But we have to think about the structural. We have to connect things that are happening, like other extractive measures. And we have to shift the narrative about Black people themselves. Or else neighborhoods at which we live will not be seen as worthy. Houses will be devalued, right? It's all about the narrative of who we are. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
And that was absolutely amazing. And it really, really details why closing the racial wealth gap is such an important topic for us to tackle. One of the things that we say in CEEM all the time is intersectional problems require intersectional solutions, right? And yes, we need people working on personal finance. Yes, we need people working on policy. And yes, we need to figure out how, as a community, we can come together culturally to do things that are in our power. And you know, our mission, as far as parity is concerned, is not just to turn the dollars over in our community, but we feel like in the Inland Empire, we make up 8% of the population. We should have 8% of the contracts at every level with government. We should have 8% of the contracts at every level with to supply all of the businesses that are in the Inland Empire. We feel like employment at every level should be 8%. Income from employment at every level should be 8%. The things that we are working towards have got to be intersectional in that way to close the gap. And even that helps close more of the income gap, the access to build wealth. It doesn't actually help us close the wealth gap. One of the things about education that you were just talking towards, I find so interesting, pre the end of segregation, most people could work a minimum wage job and pay their way through school. Also, the over 60% of white people who are in Republican states today, believed that education should be free or should require a nominal investment by the educated. When African Americans specifically started getting into higher education, you saw the percentage of contribution from federal and state governments decline significantly. We don't think that that is that those things are not that those things are not connected. We know that they are. That is systemic. It is a real thing. And so thank you so much to you both for your presentations there. As we say all the time in CEEM, you know, we are a wealth organization. A lot of people think of us as a business organization, but we build businesses through a membership cooperative structure so that we, the members of CEEM, can have an equal share in the businesses that we start. So as these businesses grow, our entire community can benefit. And we as a community can determine what we do with the proceeds. Because as an entrepreneur, when I start a business, it is I who reaps the financial rewards. And if I want to do something great with it, awesome. But if I don't, it doesn't return back into the community, right? But I have that choice. As a CEEM, we're looking to create community building or community owned and operated businesses that aren't like publicly traded companies where individuals can buy up almost the entire publicly traded company. That's how you get Jeff Bezos with so much wealth, right? It's how you get Elon Musk with so much wealth. We'll do it so that every person can only have one share of stock in any of the things, the businesses that we are operating, so that the wealth is distributed evenly as we create these businesses. That's why we ask people to join CEEM. Our measure and our thought is that we have to turn capitalism on its head to do this differently for us. So again, we thank you all. Thank you both for your presentations today. This is also Black History Month, and tomorrow is also the third anniversary of our founding. We were founded in 2018. This is our third anniversary, and we're so happy and excited to continue to be here, to continue to be in operations. We feel like the work that we get to do every day in CEEM is, again, contributing to us closing the racial wealth gap. We've created a board game called Level Up that you can get on Facebook Marketplace. You can also access it on our website, ceem.coop/levelup, and you can buy a copy there. We're excited. Our pipeline for Level Up is growing, and we again feel like this is a game that is great for Black folks to teach us career pathways, but we also think it's a game that will be great for the community, so we can invite school districts to buy hundreds of copies of this game so they can play it with their students, whether they're Black, white, or otherwise. That's how we invite revenue from large scale sources like school districts into our community, so then we can recycle those dollars. That's what we're up to with CEEM, and that's why we hope that you will join CEEM and that you'll ask others to participate with us as well. We have another gift basket also for the month of March. To enter, please follow @CEEM Co-op on Instagram and comment on the Level Up board game giveaway post. We will have one lucky winner and announce them in April. Again, we're giving away a free board game to people who comment on the post in our feed on Instagram. And so we're excited now to get to the next section, the Q&A section for this. First question was about student debt. And we'll first start with you, Ann Price, and then we'll go to you, Dempster Cherry. You mentioned student debt, and President Biden has rejected the $50,000 loan forgiveness. Do you feel that non-action like this continues to work to widen the wealth gap, or such a move would not make a large difference anyway?
It will make a big difference when you think about the debt that Black folks hold. So the difference between a $10,000 versus, a larger amount definitely will have an impact. It may help a few, but it certainly will still see a lot of folks left out, and this will continue to be an issue as more students accrue debt. So I mean, there are a number of issues here we've got to deal with in terms of how we're looking at 7, 8, $9 trillion worth of debt, student debt in this country. But as Kyle, as you mentioned, this is the origin of some of this, right? So student debt cancellation at different levels will have a tremendous impact. It will help some, but it will leave a lot of folks out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with her on that. I look at student debt specifically as as a way to withhold income. From the chart that Anna showed earlier, the disparities in the debt levels. So, unfortunately, Mr. Biden has chosen not to pursue the 50,000, but he's open to the 10,000 number, which is still significant. A $10,000 removal of debt frees up other income to participate in other forms of the economy. But it also goes back to the systemic issues that we have within our community. Even if we eliminate that debt, we still now, we have some level of parity on removing that debt, but we still don't have the tools that we would need to turn that now less, that influx of capital we can utilize. We don't have the tools that we can actually turn that into increasing our positioning. One thing that Ann had mentioned earlier, and I kind of want to really back up, is the structural limitations of how our economies are worked. One thing I realized real quickly in the financial world, and this is just a kind of scenario, say if I'm sitting across from a client, and also sitting next to that client is, let's say, Warren Buffett, and the client holds up $1 and Warren Buffett holds up $1. As a financial advisor, I can tell you 99% of the time that financial advisor is going to tell you individual something completely different than he's going to tell Warren Buffett of how to invest that $1. That's where the disparity starts, and it continues to get wider and wider from that point on. Most people who work in the financial world, they work from company dogma, and the company says we're going to use these strategies and these techniques for these individuals at a certain income strata. And for everybody else, sometimes $250,000 or more, there's literally a whole different opportunity of tools that are being utilized for them. So I always call it, if you're making less than 100,000, you have assets less than 100,000, you are going to be thrown into what I call a black hole. And it's the same black hole that not only Black people occupy, but Latino people occupy and white people occupy. It's structurally built that way. They don't want to put the effort into educating and providing the tool set for you to get out of that black hole. Whereas the other part of the strata, that they get all the extra tools and assets and worthwhile conversations to help them increase their wealth. So we've really got to focus on, not so much as envious of what these other people have, is, okay, we recognize that there's a level that's built in place here. We need to take efforts upon ourselves within our community to get over those levels, break down those barriers, find individuals or companies and organizations that can work with us, that provide us the intelligence and provide us the tool set that we can utilize to start building that intergenerational wealth. A lot of people I talk to, when they come to me to invest, they have, say, I got $20,000 and I want to participate in the stock market. And so that usual first conversation is, for me, it's a lot of listening, but it's also a lot of understanding who that person is and what their goals are, because I have to take that all into encompass before I roll out a plan for that person. So I have to really listen, understand what it is they want to achieve, and I have to, more than often than not, put in a dose of realism. You're not going to take $5,000 and turn it into $200,000 overnight. It's going to take a gradual amount of building to get there. But in the same instance, you have to think outside of the box. If you're going to go invest that $5,000 into a mutual fund, you have to understand that mutual fund right up front is going to cost you 4%. So you've already lost 4% of your $5,000. So for the duration of that first year, you've got to figure out a way, and hopefully that mutual fund recovers that 4% that you spent on it, and also brings you back a percentage of profit. That makes owning that mutual fund worthwhile. Because the mutual fund black hole you've already been put in, and the tools that you've been given, it's more likely than not that strategy that you've been put into is not going to actually work for you over the duration of your career. So when you get to your 50s and your 60s, and you're looking, well, I've been putting all this money into here and I haven't gotten any growth, and I can't get to the point where I need to retire. A lot of that is a disadvantage for you, and a lot of it is a disadvantage for the community, because again, you were never given the opportunity to do better. And I think it's incumbent upon ourselves, those that have the knowledge and have the ability to work with other people, to sit down with each and every one of us and go over the pure raw statistics. As brutal as it is, we can educate ourselves, we can work harder, we can do as much as we can to participate in the economy, but we also have to understand all of that is going to be very, very inadequate unless the systems change for our benefit.
Awesome. Thank you. And, you talked about the tools, and you talked about, having the $20,000 in cash, but, we always hear that the bulk of people's wealth comes from their home. Linda Ursary Fleming asked to elaborate on home ownership owning a home as just a place to live versus owning a home as a place to build wealth? And can we start with you?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think this has been, in the work I've done, such a hot debated issue. For some saying, before the crisis, some people would have been better off. Dorothy Brown talks about this. They would have been better off taking that money and investing it elsewhere, not in home ownership. And so I think, we have to think about the goals of, like Dempster said, there's a goals for what we might want to achieve, right? And it may be, we want to be in a place that's close to our other extended family. We may want to be close to a certain school district, right? We may see this as a real, like we're looking at this as an investment that we want to really be able to get a great return from. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we think about home ownership, safety, community, a whole host of things. But we've got to understand, we just say blanketly home ownership. We know it's not equal. We know where you live matters. We know, I'm from Dayton, Ohio. My parents' house, they bought it for $10,000 in 1960. It's still probably only worth $10,000. Like, it's not gaining any equity. I have a cousin in San Francisco whose mother bought a house in the Castro in 1970, and they just sold it for $1.5 million. So, I mean, we have to just think about that and think about the fact that we still have people who lose their homes over years, right? Like, we still have 18% of Black people don't even own a home before the age of 60, right? So and we're seeing millennials are the lowest levels of home ownership we've ever seen, right? So we've got to understand what is it we're trying to achieve through owning a home. And some people might be like, I want this as an investment, and the home ownership is a risk as well, right? So it's a complex issue that I think we just blanketly say home ownership, but there's a lot of room there when we think about markets are local and housing is local, and there's a whole host of things there.
And to follow on with that, home ownership, the old real estate adage is location, location, location. Yeah, as she mentioned, having a house in Ohio, its equity, its ability to earn or to gain more in equity versus having a house in San Francisco. Yeah, there's a big disparity there. But as a homeowner, as someone who wants to own a home, you also have to look at the realities of home ownership. Yeah, you can own a house in Oklahoma. You can own a house in Colorado. You can own a house in California. They are not going to appreciate the same. But in the same instance, if you are in California and you want to own a home and you realize you're priced out of the market here, you can in fact look to Oklahoma or look to Texas or look to some other state, not so much to live in that house, but if you can buy that house for $20,000 near a university and put a student in there and rent it for the next 20 years, you're creating a path for capital for yourself. Granted, you're recognizing that, yeah, you're not going to have that house triple or quadruple in value over that duration of time, but it is going to create a revenue stream for you. And that revenue stream can then give you the ability to maybe purchase a second house. So now you have two houses there, and you're still living in California under the constraints of it being too expensive here. But now you've got two properties that are generating income for you somewhere else. You really have to take the tool sets that are available for you and utilize them. Homeownership is fantastic, especially, if something were to happen to you in this day and age where a lot of people don't have enough insurance to cover themselves, especially as we get older and we need long-term care. I've seen it almost every day where a client will come to me and they don't have the insurance to take care of their medical needs going into the future. And the first thing they have to do is they start pulling equity out of their houses. I'm a big fan, as I mentioned earlier, of generational wealth. I'm never going to tell you to sell grandmom's house, and I really don't believe in that strategy of pulling equity out of your house to achieve that goal. But in some instances, again, we just haven't had the ability to have the conversations previous to getting into a situation where we're faced with the reality of, okay, I don't have any assets. I have to get to point B, but I don't have anything to start with point A. That's unfortunate. So yeah, location on real estate. If you can assemble enough capital to buy a house, look in a different state. Again, you don't have to live there. All it is creating a revenue stream for you.
Yeah, I think that that's such a key point. You know, real estate values in Southern California, but California in the city centers tend to go up. And oftentimes the places where we move from California do not have those same characteristics. And so again, you know, if you're in Ohio and you buy a house for $10,000 or $15,000, you might get a steal for what you can afford. But the mortgage payments that you are making are not increasing the value of your home. And I think that's such a phenomenal point, right? That, you know, these things matter. You can also buy in California and you might be house poor, but you know, in the end of the day, your house, for the most part, not every time, but for the most part, your home is going to be worth more when you go to sell, especially if it is a very long-term investment asset. Now, we're not giving investment advice, but it's a way to think about how we generate wealth here. And, you know, Mr. Cherry does give investment advice, but those would happen on a one-on-one basis, not in a conversation like this.
Right.
That really talks towards the systems, right? And Dempster, you talked about the tools. Music Changing Lives, who's a nonprofit out here, they ask, what are a few systems that we should be using or doing to build wealth?
I'm a big fan, and I'll say it multiple times. Your money has to work for you, period. So in those tools, specifically on the financial side, when I mention insurance is usually an unpleasant conversation. But a lot of people, you know, they're influenced by insurance needs because they have insurance on their car, they have insurance on their house, or they're paying for their health insurance. So these are the day-to-day realities, and they look at, you know, the money they pay out versus what they get into return. So it kind of puts a bad taste in your mouth when you're spending $1,200 a year on insurance and you're not getting anything back, but you do have coverage. What I like to tell people is you have to understand insurance actually can be your friend if you know how to utilize it. So for a basic life insurance policy, someone would say, well, I need a life insurance because I want to protect my family. And most often than not, they'll be guided into purchasing a term policy. You know, in the life insurance world, there's basically two types of insurance: term insurance or whole life insurance. And the easiest way to differentiate the two is simple. One is renting, one is owning. Term insurance is renting. You're paying a fee on a monthly or quarterly basis, however it is, and it's gaining you no cash value. It's all it is bringing forth an insurance contract that will protect your life. Whole life insurance has cash value. So as every month you pay your fee, a portion of that goes to keep your insurance running. Another portion of that goes into what we call a forced savings account, and it appreciates over time. So as you hold this insurance policy for the next 20 years versus holding your term insurance policy for the next 20 years, with that term policy, you get no money back. You just spend money out. With the whole life policy, not only do you get coverage, you have this increasing cash value there that you can actually take it out tax-free and utilize it. Again, that substantiates your income. So that's just a small portion of looking at using an insurance product to help you build wealth. But there's also other insurance products outside of just that basic life insurance policy. What I recommend to especially young couples, people who are just getting married and have kids that are under the age of 18. If you have kids under the age of 18, their level of insurance cost is extremely low. If you use, again, another insurance policy called an IUL, it's called an Index Universal Life Insurance Policy. What that does, it operates exactly like a whole life policy. However, it's indexed, meaning it's tied to the stock market. So its performance is tracked by the stock market. So if you have a child and you get an IUL policy for that child under 18, the cost is going to cost you less than $100. You're going to lock that cost in for that child for the rest of their life. An insurance policy for the rest of their life for $100. So when they're 70 years old, they're still paying $100. However, that IUL has an appreciation just like that whole life. So you're getting cash value. So over the next 30 to 50 to 70 years, your $1,000, $1,200 a year you put into this policy is going to accumulate. And generally these policies work by the time that child is 65, they have several million saved inside that policy, as well as a death benefit. So they have the same avenue of gaining wealth from that. During the course of their life, they can borrow from that insurance policy, helping them substantiate their income as necessary. They can use that to buy a house, buy a car, pay for education, however it needs to be done. But again, these are products that are there that most of our community don't even know that are available to them, because the people they're working with aren't going to tell them. But so there's many different avenues, and as Kyle said, we can talk about this on a one-on-one basis most any day. But you have to get yourself in the mindset of, okay, having a plan, or at least having an idea if you want to have a plan of getting to point B, and then sitting down with someone like myself or another representative that's willing to give you the insight and provide you the tool set to help you understand not only your levels of risk capability, but what is going to be out there to help you substantiate your actual financial dreams.
Awesome. And thank you so much for that. One of the things that I hope that doesn't get lost is you said that you could take a loan out against the value of the insurance product.
Yes.
And I think that we don't get that kind of advice normally for how we think about insurance products. But not just that. A friend of mine, I was having a conversation with him the other day, and he was like, yeah, I learned early that I never actually had to use my own money to put in a down payment. If I had the down payment for my house, I'll put that cash in the bank and borrow against that cash.
Mm-hmm.
Now giving me 65 or 75% more cash, and I'm using the bank's money as my down payment.
Mm-hmm.
And the interest accrues on his debt, not necessarily something that he has to pay in addition to his mortgage. And so until he reaches the ceiling on that facility. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think leveraging financial tools are things that can introduce risk, but if we manage it smartly, can help us to really be able to grow our wealth much more quickly. And instead of taking our wealth out of our house, like you said, you don't necessarily support, but there are other ways that we can create value. And so thank you so much for that. And the same question to you about the tools. Like, what are some other tools as a community that we can use to build wealth?
Well, I was so into that conversation. Thank you. I always love these because I always get my own also further education. Really, really important to understand barriers at multiple levels and what's really keeping us both from individual, our family building wealth there, and thinking about it more broadly and more structurally. My tools I use the tools of policy change, right? I'm looking at bigger change. So like I said, I'm the 30,000. That's at the 30,000 foot level. I've been working on an issue that people don't pay a lot of attention to, which is child support debt. Been working on it for several years, and state-sponsored child support debt and what it does to our community. And essentially, when you have that debt, and it's debt largely held by men, but some women, here in California, a total debt, I don't know where it is now, was somewhere around $9 billion. That people are burdened with. But the biggest thing there is that you can never have an asset if you have this debt. You're basically an indentured servant. You can't get a passport, so you can never own, which means you can never pass on anything to your children, right? And so I've been working on this because, when you have someone locked in and it can never, ever build wealth and never can pass that down, you're talking about generations, or having family members pay off this, I think, very unjust debt. So we are looking at ways too in which criminal debt. We just got the governor signed last year a bill to relieve 23 fees over fines of criminal debt. You're talking $16 billion wiped out. These are things that I say hold people back. People talk about, well, gosh, I had $800 a month taken out of my check. Now that's money they have. And I see that is money that they can now do something with, right?
Mhm.
So I'm working on it from that perspective, but to understand those hidden places that, someone who wants to go out and start a business, and these aren't even necessarily that you have a criminal record, it's a civil matter, and you can't do that. It's holding back people from their dreams. So that's the kind of stuff that I've been working on, those kind of invisible kind of debts that really are keeping people, cementing them in place.
Yeah, I think that's heavy. Like, you're right. That's one of those things that just that falls through the cracks. And this we know this economy is unjust, and it's unjust to men and women. And so when we have a space where our men are not only incarcerated at a more higher rate for longer periods of time, also they have debt that assumes that accrues to them because either of their participation in the in the prison industrial complex on some level, or their lack of child support payments really becoming a hindrance. The people who should be earning more, the people who should be based on the economic results, not how the economy should be, but those groups are held back, and it seems like it is all it is all on purpose, if not in the purpose of those who create the policies. Another policy that we would like to touch on today, Matthew Cosby asks a question, and there's a couple of questions in here, but we've seen an increase in identity politics, noting that Black are disproportionately not as wealthy as whites. How realistic do you think reparations are likely to be given, is the first question. The second question is, it surrounds the question of who gets reparations, and how do you then give reparations, given that we're going to have issues with people who do not receive reparations? And we'll start with you.
So those are two questions, right? One was reparations. I don't remember the first. I was focused on the second. I'll start there. Well, we know that now, the governor signed a bill. We're going to have a reparations task force in California. And the question is that I've always said we still need more study around this, right? And not study for study's sake, but I think there's a lot of pieces here. One is we don't even have an understanding and acknowledgement of slavery, and not just slavery, Jim Crow and its impact, right? We don't have we've had no kind of truth and reconciliation in this country. And this to me is a path, and so I think, I've heard a lot of different, even local communities talking about how they think about reparations, how they think of this differently. It's not a check, it's a land trust, it's a whole series of different ideas that I think are quite intriguing, that need to be put in the public discourse, because we go straight to checks. And then there is a question of lineage, and I think it's totally complicated. When, who are you counting? I'm a, part of my family descendant from slaves that came from Virginia. Part of my dad's family came from Barbados. But they came in the 1800s. Like, there's a lot for us to figure out in terms of that. And I think I don't want to spend my time there yet, because I want us to think about how do we go about some steps to get to a way that we can actually see reparation and have ideas in many forms, and just to even recognize what's happening in California, which people do not think about. What's happened with Black people in California is a step, right? Is a first very, very, very little step, but it's a step. So I think it's a bigger conversation. I think we have way to go. I think we should really be open to how a lot of people are talking about what reparations could even look like, and it'll be interesting to see a couple of years from now where this task force goes. So, reparations would be the only thing that could massively like close this massive wealth gap, but even reparations wouldn't do it. I mean, you would still need other policies. So we have to think about that. Like this is just a very, very large issue. And I think some of us are trying to chunk out piece by piece, knowing that we're trying to contribute to the black people's ability to build wealth. So, yeah.
And again, it's completely correct there. Yeah, I look at reparations. I guess let me rewind. So I think back to the post-slavery days when we had the 40 acres and a mule. That didn't really work out. So in the event of giving reparations, do we just, yeah, as Ann mentioned, do we cut a check? And because of our critical mindset and capital, if you receive a check for, say, untold hundreds of thousands of dollars, what are you going to do with it? Is the government going to tax you on that? That's probably my first question. Secondary, if they don't tax you on it, are you going to spend it all in one place? Because again, if we want to enhance our future, we have to do something to our present. So reparations is an ongoing conversation, but it means different things to different people. And as Ann mentioned, I also have family coming out of the Caribbean. So then I also have family that's European, and I also have family that's American Indian. So, what level of reparations are we talking about here? After slavery, we saw that landholders and slave owners, they were paid and compensated for the slaves they lost. That's historical documentation there, where the slaves, again, were not given the 40 acres and a mule. The Indians, same situation. They were driven from their territorial lands and deposited in the middle of the country and given basically disease-infested blankets. So there's a whole spectrum of looking at how do we equalize, or at least get to a level of equalization for everyone in the country. But it's not going to, it can't be the same for everyone in the country because it just doesn't make equitable sense. So, it is going to be a long-term conversation. And as Ann also mentioned, it's not just putting capital or possessions in your hands. You are going to have to change the system. The tax system especially, has to be dramatically changed because it's not geared towards the individual. It's geared toward the individual who has a lot of assets, not for the guy who's, all of a sudden got a $500,000 check. That's going to work in your detriment. So there's an ongoing conversation that has to be had, and it's a valid and very vibrant conversation. I don't think it's going to be solved this year, and nor do I think it's going to be solved perhaps in the next 5 years. So I'm not going to try to burden the Biden administration with this push for reparations, because historically we already know the answer to that one. It's not going to happen. But we have to utilize our community to press the issue, whether it starts locally or it starts on the statewide or regionally. We have to continue to press the issue because it is a matter of economic importance, not only for our current day, but our future. We have to get to a level where there is a sense of equality, a level playing field, so we can continue to participate in this American economy.
Awesome. Thank you. When we talk about how we participate, especially as we're pushing the agenda, the narrative forward around how we get economic reparations, but not just reparations, we get what is due to us, at least in the in how we address our economic concerns. There have been a lot of types of organizations sprouting up. We're one. We are a membership cooperative. There are a lot of coalitions of worker-owned cooperatives that have been sprouting up across the country. Tina Wright, Dr. Wright asked, what are the benefits and limits of mutual aid networks? And can we talk about other types of networks that you see coming up, where there are Black organizers and organizations that are looking to create wealth from a communal standpoint as opposed to individual?
Per se, I don't know of individual organizations, but I am I am actually this year and the tail end of last year, I'd gotten into conversations with a couple of community organizations, primarily in the Northwest, and then one in Florida, looking to basically take dilapidated property and dilapidated assets that are in these communities, and how do we transform them into capital growing opportunities. So that, that's a conversation primarily on a local level of, is there other assets that we can, that we can collectively put together to perhaps buy a piece of land or buy a building and turn it into something else? Or, what is it that we're looking to absolutely achieve? So I think on the very local level, yes, there is an advantage for mutual aid. And I think it needs to be more prevalent than it actually is. But that also entails that we have to get outside of our comfort zones. We have to be able to talk to our neighbor. We have to be able to share our thoughts and our understandings with our neighbors. We can't go into it thinking that everyone thinks exactly like we think, and we're going to go into this organization with this one mindset of, we're going to push this directive, when that directive may be false for the remainder of the community. So it's important to have these conversations. It's important to get everyone that wants to be involved, get that mindset wrapped around an idea, and then move forward in that idea. As we've seen, there's money out there to be utilized if the opportunity is true and it presents itself as something that's worthwhile. And I work with private investors and also organizations that have capital available. And 9 times out of 10, they'll ask me, do you have anything that would come up on our radar as being something that we would take a look at? And more often than not, unfortunately, I don't have too much to provide them. It's just like, there's some scuttlebutt going on. There's some opportunities perhaps that'll come about, but I can't drive them. The individuals that really want these things to happen, they have to push that for them. Again, you have to get outside of your comfort zone. You have to open that front door and go out there and knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Perhaps you might be feeling the same way. Would you like to work with me to perhaps start changing things? And whether that's meaning, getting on your local HOA or getting involved in your local community, community protection, even for that instance, and that's actually I guess like a timely incident right now, is using mutual aid for community protection. That's something that I'm seeing starting to happen an awful lot in the South. And for us here in California, that's kind of foreign, because we rely on, civil services for community protection. But we see in the South, where the disparity of services isn't happening, mutual aid comes into play. And it's not only for community protection, but it's also for basic education, for being able to bring food banks into the community to help our people survive and live. So yeah, there's mutual opportunities out there, and massive opportunities out there, that if we really collectively in these certain areas around the country do kind of a CEEM model, that yeah, we could achieve quite a lot if we all collectively work together.
And the same question for you about organizations like CEEM that have been created. We talk about mutual aid networks. We are a membership cooperative. Can you talk about what the research says around those and leveraging structures like these?
Yeah, I mean, we know that Jessica Nimbard is the queen mother of talking about cooperatives and understanding Black cooperatives over time, but also looking at the community benefits. She actually is looking at this as an economist to really quantify what those benefits are. I mean, we do this in so many ways. When I think about all the different cultural ways we do to lend, right? Certainly, kind of informal lending circles. I have a colleague who started this amongst his family, that they contribute. Someone manages the money and they use it for a specific goal. Sometimes it's just to give money to young people as they, go off to college or some other thing, and communities can do this to kind of build that kind of support. And I think that structure and that history is so foundational to who we are and how we've always survived and thrived is through a kind of a cooperative model and a mutual aid model. We've been doing some work in New Orleans, so Dempster's right. There has been, they've just been hit terribly, and they've talked a lot to us about at every level, just the way they're feeding people and caring for people. There's a group up here in Oakland that basically is, really started to deal with, kind of low level violent acts. So when there's a stabbing or there's, someone has been beaten, they come and supply aid before an ambulance. And I mean, there's all sorts of ways it's that we have done this for survival, but also for us to thrive and even build wealth. So I think, it will be interesting to see what's been happening over COVID, how that will continue post-crisis, and how that could actually lend itself to for people being in other kinds of more formal arrangements, around and with more of a kind of cooperative spirit. So I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, a lot of this conversation, closing the racial wealth gap, is about wealth, and we got to talk at some point about the institutions of wealth in our community. William Bryan asks, while we're focused on closing the racial wealth gap, we are losing Black banks. Should this be something that we are concerned about, and what can we do as a community to change this as an issue? And Anne, we'll start with you here, please.
I was going to say, let's start with Dempster on that one. I think I think that we focus a lot on Black banks, and there's a complexity there in terms of the fact that, of course, we want to see Black banks thrive. We know what their history has been to kind of fill a gap of where we could not get access to lending. The portfolios of Black banks are minuscule compared to mainstream banks. I think that, we have seen people, there was a whole push, I think last year, for people to put deposits into Black banks, and we saw those soar. Will that enable Black banks to keep their doors open? Not necessarily, I think, broadly, we have to think about all of our institutions and what they're facing. Like, Black banks is one, but we also have a number of other important institutions that are important to us in terms of wealth in other ways. Cultural institutions, our HBCUs, there's a number of institutions. So I think that there's a lot of focus on Black banks. Yes, it's a very complicated issue of having them flourish. I don't think we're going to see Black banks, we're not going to see a rise in Black banks. We may see those that are existing to continue to serve communities. Certainly there's a lot of work happening with African-American CDFIs. So I think we're going to see a very mixed picture. It's a horizon not necessarily particularly sunny in the whole large scale of Black banks, but I'll let Dempster jump in on this one.
And she's exactly right. Banking in itself is changing. It's changing dramatically right before our eyes. We're seeing the confluence now of fiat money, regular paper money that we see now it has a direct competitor in cryptocurrency. Banking has changed to a level that it's not the same traditional, there's a bank on every corner anymore. And we also see, some banks don't want some businesses. And, I'll use the cannabis business an example. It doesn't matter if you have a Black bank, a Latino bank, or a white bank. If you have a cannabis business, there aren't any banks that are going to want to take your money. And so, you have a thriving business, but you can't utilize your earnings to help you leverage for perhaps a loan for capital or a loan for expansion. So you're at a disadvantage. So banking right now is going to continue to change. I don't have a whole lot of clarity on if Black banks are going to rise like the phoenix. I don't really see that happening. I see banks consolidating, bigger banks getting bigger, smaller banks disappearing. That's just the kind of the position that we're in the economy. But in the same instance, when someone says, well, I want to put my money in a bank because a bank is safe and bank provides me these attributes for growing my wealth, and then I kind of sit back and I ask the person, well, what do you expect the bank is going to provide you outside of perhaps a capability of getting a loan? How is it going to help you substantiate your savings? Because you're going to retrieve less than 1%. So that's not going to really stack up on your savings. So one technique and one tool that I tell a lot of people that don't realize is that if you have a brokerage account, and not all brokerages are equal, but if you have a brokerage account, you actually can use your brokerage account like a checking account and get a higher interest rate. They won't tell you this unless you ask. So if you have $25,000 in a bank, you're going to get less than 1% interest rate. If you have $25,000 in cash in your brokerage account, you're probably going to get FDIC protection, and you're probably going to get a higher interest rate of at least 1% versus that bank. And you can tie into that brokerage account a check writing ability or debit card ability. So you have the exact same transactional ability that you'd have in a bank, but you're no longer in a bank. And oddly enough, you don't have any fees. There's no late fees. So, looking at traditional brick and mortar banks, they're viable. The model is in fact changing, but that model is changing to a degree and to a level that if you pay attention, you can utilize it to the exact same capabilities as a traditional brick and mortar bank.
Yeah, I'll say, in addition to that, a lot of the reason that the Black banks are not doing well is because of our Black business community is not there to put our deposits into Black banks. Personally, I tried to put the deposits of our McDonald's business at One United, and we couldn't. They simply could not service us. Their business model was not to service a business like ours that is a high cash business and had a lot of need for treasury services that they just didn't provide. Yeah. And so we could not bank with them outside of for our primary business. So we opened up accounts, but we couldn't. I think that, when we talk about banking, Ann said it very well, these issues are not just, how do we service the customer like regular Black folks? It's how do we figure out what the ecosystem needs and create an ecosystem that requires a bank and requires a series of banks. And then we can figure out how to support there. But until we get parity at the business level, we're not going to have enough, not just deposit need and not just loan need, but for all of the products that we need in a bank. And we can focus also on the wealth building aspect if we're building banks for ourselves. So it's not just, how do we support businesses? It's not just how do we support individuals, but how do we create ecosystems that drive value? But it starts with having parity, so we have enough to capitalize the endeavor from its inception. There are a lot of questions, a few questions for each of you in the chat. We would like to know if you have any writings, anything that's been published, if you can direct people there. And Bobby, if you have, or Dempster, if you have, if you are accepting clients, can you answer that for folks as well?
Yes. Years ago, when I first in this industry as a young broker, I started a blog, and the blog is located at dreadheads.net, DREDHEADZ. It's a weekly financial blog. I've been putting it out since I believe 2011, 2012. And it doesn't give you per se financial advice, but the purpose of the blog is to kind of give you a summation of what's going on in the market, not so much in the stock market, but in the economy itself. So it comes out every week. It's free. If you'd like to, please feel free to go to that website and check it out. I used to have a radio show here in the Inland Empire a couple years ago, speaking specifically on financial issues. I don't do that anymore. It turned out to be a venue that I wasn't reaching the audience that I wanted to reach. But I do enjoy working with people and sharing what I know. And yes, I am taking on new clients. That there is no capital limit to that. So I know a lot of people, especially in this area, have asked me, I'd love to work with you, but I don't have the money to come and work with you. And I try to remind people the reason I established these firms is specifically for that. It's not so much as you got a mountain of cash that you want to perform for you. It's because you don't have any cash and you need something to perform for you. The strategies that we provide to our clients are they run the full gamut from conservative to aggressive to moderate, or however your level of capital is. You want to get to a point where your money is working for you. When you sleep, your money needs to be appreciating. When you're working your real job or your second job, your other money needs to be working for you. That's probably the first point you have to recognize in wealth building, is that you can work as many jobs as you want to, or as you're physically able to, but that doesn't mean you're getting any better. You've got to get to a point where your money is actually performing for you independently. But again, that's, I can have these conversations all day long, and I'd love to have these conversations with as many people as I possibly can to instill and provide some insight of the avenues and the strategies and the tools that are out there to utilize, to understand, and to begin to put into place for yourself and your family. So over the horizon, you can look back 10, 15 years and say, hey, I put this strategy in place, and here we are now, 20 years later, 15 years later, and this is what we have. This is what we were able to produce and provide for ourselves. It's getting that type of mindset and thinking of, I used to tell college kids when they come to me when I used to give a financial class, I'd ask them, do you go out on the weekends? Yeah, I go out every weekend. So how much money do you spend on the weekends? Oh, about $200. So, okay, fantastic. Next Saturday, when you go out, you got $200 in your pocket. Do me a favor. Take $20, put it in your shoe. And looking like I'm crazy. No, take $20 and put it in your shoe. And every weekend you want to go out, put another $20 in your shoe. Over a period of time, that $20 is going to add up. So again, you just have to change your mindset and allow yourself to think, not so much as the here and now. You really have to allow yourself to think over the horizon and use tools that are provided for you, or use elements in your community that you can go to and ask questions. Because they're, we're for the most part, we're always there. We'd love to get more people coming in our doors and speaking with you and working with you. As Kyle said, we're 8% of the population up here. And I tell clients all the time, I said, I have more clients in Texas than I have in California. Because in Texas, the African-American community, when I try to interact in that society, they come right to me. They flock right to me, and they want to have questions and answer sessions, and they want to know what they can do to help better their own selves. When I try that same avenue here in California, it hasn't really translated very well. And part of that is me, because I probably need to spend more time getting and interfacing inside the community and helping people break down barriers, because a lot of people are shy and they get intimidated when they see someone, perhaps of someone in my industry. I look at it this way: I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to help you. If you have a question on just whatever it is, feel free to email me, call me, text me. I'll be more than happy to take the time out of my day to address that concern and help you get to where you want to be. Ultimately, we have to be a community to get to where we want to go. We can't do this individually.
Awesome. And the same question to you, and then I'm going to ask, and then we'll wrap it up. But the question was just if where people can find anything that you've published, or how people can follow your work.
Yeah, I've never published a book. I've probably written several papers. You can find them on our website at the Insight Center. So it's um, insightcced.org. And you can find some work that we've done in research there. Um, yeah, that's the best way to do it. I'm about to do a paper with Sandy Darity, and he's doing a lot of work around reparations, and so we're going to be putting out a paper soon. So that's where all my work is stored. You can find it on our website.
Awesome, thank you. And Dempster, what would you like to leave with the group in closing? And you're muted, Dempster.
In closing, I really appreciate being involved in the conversation today. I'm looking forward to a after hours or ongoing conversation after this. But I'm very, very energized that a lot of people have come on today to hear us out and take away what they can from this conversation. And again, circle back around and feel free to address us individually as it bears into your life. But ultimately, we are 8% of the population here in the Inland Empire. So it's in our best interest to, as Kyle said, make sure that our numbers reflect that 8% across the board, and not only in employment and in salaries and in homeownership, but in everything. Why not? Now is the time, and this is I think the enablement of the African American community in the United States is now. It's not 50 years ago, and it's not 20 years in the future. It's right now.
Awesome.
I often talk a lot about structural issues and at the 50,000 foot level, but I didn't have a chance to talk about something that I still think is very important at the individual level, and one that I was really taught early going to the HBCU, and we had a director who was like, as 18 and 19-year-olds, go home and talk to your parents about having a will, and these are conversations that we don't want to have. But we have to think about what happens when, someone passes and they don't designate where things should go or be or who should have them. We've probably seen families in fights about who gets what. Only 15% of Black people have wills. And so I would say, at an individual level, that's something that we can do. There have been organizations trying to really helping people to do this work and help them kind of, come up with a will. But it allows us to have a conversation with their families about wealth in a very real way. I would say, I agree. This is a time, I'm seeing this as a very exciting time for us to really assert what we know we need to thrive and to push on that at all levels. And we are seeing, I think, some transformative ideas being put out there, organizations that are doing incredible on the ground work at local levels that I think often we don't see across this country because we're focused so much on national work, but the work is amazing. So we have to really figure out how to spread this in our communities, to really think, even though we as a small population, we can be invisibilized in very, very, very meaningful ways. So we have to actually, really work in community together, because we're not going to solve these issues by ourselves. We need community. So thank you so much.
Awesome. And thank you both so much. This has been such an awesome space for us to talk about building wealth. As we envisioned what we wanted to do and the change that we wanted to be in the world, we came up with CEEM primarily for this. People talk about the social determinants of health and education and those other things, but they come back to your socioeconomic status. If you in your socioeconomic status comes back to two things. Research tells us the determinants of socioeconomic status are your access to power and wealth. It's that simple. If we can fix power and wealth for our community, not just for individuals, but for our community, we can change our community's socioeconomic status. If we can change our community's socioeconomic status, the health outcomes improve, the educational outcomes improve, the of course financial outcomes improve as well. So we are here and in this conversation in Black History Month, because this is the Black history that we are creating today. We are changing the wealth dynamic starting here in the Inland Empire. And we're excited to have folks that are pulling along the same end of the rope with us, like Dempster Cherry, like Ann Price. I think Ann Price's takeaway was phenomenal. Have a will, establish a living trust. There are some members of CEEM who are attorneys that focus on helping people that look like us, who might not have as much, still be prepared to transition, right? Whether that is having enough life insurance so that you can cover your funeral and some other expenses for your family, or having a will and having a trust, so that the state doesn't make the determination for what happens with your assets. And so again, we thank you. We are excited to be able to be here to engage in wealth building. We will be right back here next month with another awesome topic on March 25th, which is also the founder of CEEM's birthday. And so we'll be excited to celebrate with him and celebrate with all of you. And so today, I will be closing us out in prayer, and we begin and end in prayer in CEEM because we understand that we have been blessed. We also understand that everybody is not a Christian, but we want to talk to creation and ask that the Creator holds us in esteem. And so we are doing the work that He would have us do on behalf of His people. And so we ask that everybody bows their heads in reverence as we talk to the Lord. So thank you, God, today for enabling us to have this call, for enabling us to have these awesome folks here, and for enabling us to receive this education. We pray that it is your will, if it is your will, that the education goes beyond the people who are on the call today, and we are able to create meaningful and lasting change on behalf of the kingdom. We thank you for the blessings that you have bestowed upon us in CEEM and across our membership. We pray that we get to be a continuous blessing to the kingdom as we all get to move forward. We thank you and move onward and upward. Amen. So thank you all again so much for joining us. We will be posting a PDF of Mr. Cherry's 8 Steps to Financial Success on our Facebook page for you all to view. In the chat, we've posted links to Ann Price's site at the Insight.org, as well as to Mr. Cherry's work at DRC Wealth Management. And so thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to being with you all soon.